This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
I added the transcription to see what that does.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Owens. I'm the procurement officer for the city of Easthampton. Today is the first meeting of the evaluation committee for the proposals received for the elementary school reuse. Our consultant, Emily Ines, has prepared some slides. Jeff has done a very basic agenda for us. What I would like to do is go around and have each participant introduce themselves, and then we will turn this meeting over to Emily to kind of talk to us about this initial meeting, goals and objectives, and where we will stand in future meetings. We should start clockwise from the top left. Jeff, could you start for us?
Yep. Thanks, Michael. So I'm Jeff Bagg. I'm the city planner. And for the purpose of this meeting, I will volunteer to take some minutes so that we have that under our belt. So I don't know if we're all in the same order. So Michael, if you want to call other people out, I think that'd be good.
Emily, could you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Emily Ennis. I am an urban planner and designer, and I'm also the consultant that has been assisting the city with the RFP process and now with the selection process.
Thanks, Emily. Committee member Megan Harvey.
Let me unmute. Excuse me. I'm Megan Harvey. I'm a school committee member and was appointed to this committee to help out here.
And Greg.
Greg Nuttleman. I'm the Director of Public Works for the city.
Salem.
Hi, I'm Salem Derby. I'm going on my 20th year as a city councilor, chair of the ordinance subcommittee, and have done a few school reuse buildings in my tenure.
Just a quick note of clarification for the record. Jeff Bagg, Councilor Salem Derby, City School Committee member Megan Ward Harvey, and Greg Nuttleman, and myself are members of the Evaluation Committee. Emily Ines is going to be consulting with us as we move through the process. And I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And I'm just going to share my screen. Let me just set this up so it works properly. And I'm just going to walk us through some of the things that you're going to be looking at over the next couple of weeks before our next meeting. So I'm just going to give a very brief introduction as to sort of put us where we are in this process. So there was an original strategic plan, the Easthampton Downtown Strategic Plan, and as part of this planning process, there was a discussion and assessment of the future uses for the three schools that are the subject of the RFP, Maple, Pepin, and Center. And I'm going to go over this fairly quickly just to, make sure we're all on the same page, but do stop me if you have any questions. From this strategic plan, which looked at different options, came, then there was the housing production plan, which the city also did, which really guided the city's understanding of what was needed in terms of housing, including affordable housing. With that, with those two having been done, the strategic plan in 2020, the housing production plan in 2021, in June 2021, there was a kickoff for the process of planning for the disposition of these three schools, primarily for housing, although the downtown strategic plan identified some other uses. The committee that was involved in the disposition planning process really narrowed it down to housing and community uses, and you'll see that as you go through the RFP. This gives the timeline for that process. The elementary school reuse committee met through September of 2021 through April of 2022. There was a parallel process of additional technical studies and investigations, some of which were supported by funds from the state and others by funds from the city. So that happened from actually October of 2021 all the way through June of 2022. And the purpose of those investigations was to provide enough information to developers so that they could come back with a good proposal to the city. City Council spent a couple of months in 2022 reviewing the RFP, and then this initial schedule here had the RFP being released in October 22. I think it was actually a little bit later. Proposals were due last month, and we received 3 collectively for this committee to review. And we are here now in this breakdown of the postal approval roles, and we're going to go into more specifics about our role. But basically, this committee will be looking through the proposals, doing some evaluations. They'll also be interviewing the proposees, the people who submitted the proposals, and making a recommendation to City Council. And then City Council will undertake their own process after they receive the recommendation. Will eventually select a preferred developer sometime probably through to early summer of this year. And then after that, there's a process whereby there's a negotiation with the developer to, solidify the agreement. There's a design process, and then the developer who would have to go through the normal application and approval process for any project. In terms of what this committee is doing, we have 3 meetings in which we'll be talking with each other. This is obviously the first one. We're going to talk about the criteria and discuss how we're going to weight them. And then you're going to be meeting again to review the proposals according to the criteria. We've got 2 options for dates, which we'll talk about. We also need to conduct interviews, and we'll talk a little bit about that process today. And then we're going to review those results from the interviews, complete the rankings, and confirm the recommendations to City Council. Unfortunately, one of my, I must have opened up an earlier version of this. I apologize. The next event is that we're going to deliver the written recommendation to the City Council for their package and present the recommendations to City Council probably April 5th or thereabouts. The purpose, as I mentioned earlier, this disposition fulfills the objectives of the Easthampton Downtown Strategic Plan and identifies the redevelopment options for these 3 schools. The whole purpose is to obviously reuse an existing city asset, but also to contribute to the revitalization to the downtown. And part of that is increasing housing options in the downtown. And as you look through this, you'll see that there were 3 main goals. One was for affordable housing. One was to support community values. And of that, the desire to keep the Pepin Gym and auditorium or cafeteria available for future community use scored very high. And then there was a goal of flexibility in the RFP to allow the most options for developers to respond. And Mayor, welcome. I see that you were able to join us. So glad to see you. I'm just bringing everybody up to speed. There are 13 criteria in the RFP that you'll want to pay attention to, and you'll see, I'm going to use this slide to introduce it for you to see what's here, but this deck, which you can go through in more detail as you do your review, identifies each of the evaluation criteria and then talks about why these criteria are important. You'll see a not advantageous, advantageous, and highly advantageous, and that's what we're going to be using to score these proposals against each other. The criteria are basically a way of comparing in a systematic manner the information that you're going to read in each of these proposals. So as I said, there's 13 of them. I'm just calling them out so that you can see them, and then we can jump back to them. Do note, and I mentioned this later, there are also sections 3 and 4 in the RFP. 3 talk about the goals of the disposition and some of the requirements that the developers needed to meet in submitting the proposal. And 4 is the information that they were required to submit as part of the proposal. So when you do your read through and review, pay close attention to those as well. And so I'm just going to jump forward, and again, we can go back, but all of this criteria comes into the criteria weightings. And what this does is it allows us, again, to compare systematically the proposals against each other. So you see all of the evaluation criteria in front of you. There are 2 ways that we can do this. One is by just simply assigning a point to each column. So 0 points if it's not advantageous, 1 if it's advantageous, and 2 if it's highly advantageous. You just total it up, whichever one's the proposals met. And then once you're done with that, you have the total score and you can compare it against each other. However, there's another option, and that is to group the criteria into specific categories. The way I've grouped them here, as an example, is you've got the first three are really community desires or things that are important to the community. 4 through 8 is about the buildings and what happens with the buildings in terms of whether it's the design or new construction or retention. And 9 through 13, including the interview, are really about sort of the base characteristics of any proposal. You can group these and you can assign a weighting to them. And then the weighting privileges some of them higher than others. And we did have a conversation with the committee before the RFP went through. This information wasn't required to be in the RFP, but it's something that we should talk about and decide upon today before you decide to do, or before you start your formal review. And then with that, we'll move into the steps for evaluating the proposal. But I'm going to stop here because this is the first part of the conversation and turn it back over to Michael. No worries.
I just wanted to let the committee know that I've already looked at all the proposals, obviously. It appears to me that everyone meets minimum qualifications. I will go through those in detail and have information related to that specific item at our next meeting. But my sense is that all meet the minimum evaluation criteria, which is outlined on page 26 and 27 of the RFP.
And that's important because if any of them hadn't met those minimum criteria, then we could choose to set the ones that did not meet the minimum criteria aside and focus on the ones that did. So thank you, Michael, for that.
Sure. I mean, you will have something directly from me at our next meeting regarding those minimum criteria that they've met.
Terrific. Jeff?
Thanks. And Michael, thanks for that note. I'm going to include that in the minutes. And then I just wanted to offer Salem. Salem, do you want to chime in quickly, just in case you have to peel out? Do you want to give us an update, or do you want to say anything? You may have to leave the meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm going to try to stay on as much as I can. I don't know if there's anything for me to chime in about at this point other than the weighting system, but I don't know if we're going to be discussing that. I think that both have some advantages. So I'm not sure I have my mind fully made up on that. So, but that's about it for now. I am going to try to stay on the call, even if I have to, turn my camera off. So.
Great. And so Emily, that's a question back to you. Like, do you think do you want to prompt us through some additional discussions of the weighting?
I think what I want to do, actually, knowing that Councilor Derby potentially has to jump off, is I'm going to walk through the rest of the things that need to happen before the next meeting, and then we'll come back to the discussion. That way, if you have to jump off, you know what's coming up. So one of the things I want to make sure we talk about today is the weighting systems. The other thing is we've obviously, received these 3 proposals. So you have homework, and I want to talk a little bit about the homework. Homework is, unsurprisingly, to read each of the proposals and then do a proposal by proposal review, so that you understand for yourself how each of the components of the proposal match up with the evaluation criteria. Fill out a worksheet, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit of what we do with that. But, did you feel that the proposal met each of the categories? And in terms of the, not advantageous, advantageous, or highly advantageous, and why? Did you think that there was any information missing from that? So Michael's going to check to make sure it meets or has already started to check to make sure it meets the minimum criteria. But in terms of your own comfort level in approving this or approving a recommendation to go forward to City Council, rather, did you think that there was anything missing? And that's where sections 3 and 4 also come in. And that missing is important because we want to identify as a group interview questions. And so at the next meeting, we're going to talk about our initial rankings of the proposal based on your criteria review. And we're also going to identify interview questions. So at the end of the next meeting, we should have a solid initial ranking and we should have all of the interview questions set. And then what we would do is with that, we would be talking about, okay, for the next steps is, when are the interviews happening, who's doing the interviewing, and then making sure that we have that ready to go. Now, there are two options in terms of doing the actual rankings. You can each fill out a sheet and turn them in, and then we put all the numbers together and add them up and see what that comes out to. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is going criterion by criterion through all 13 and ranking them so that the only ranking is a consensus ranking. They have their advantages and disadvantages. One is a little bit faster, right? Because you can submit them all and I can plug them into the spreadsheet, which exists behind the rankings, and we see what the numbers come up to. There are some advantages, however, to discussing it as a group and coming up with the rankings there. So that is the other thing I'd like to decide today, if possible. Which weighting system are we going to use before your review, and B, how you want to do the weighting as a group, as opposed to, your individual thoughts on the weightings. And so with that, I'm happy to jump back to any of these pieces. We can go through the evaluation criteria in more detail, or we can just jump back to the weighting systems and talk about the how you want to do that. And Michael, I don't know if you've got, I see Jeff first. Jeff, you first, and then I'll ask my question.
Oh, I should have waited. In the previous discussions, there had been some leaning towards the consensus model.
Mm-hmm.
The way to, we will generate like a pretty short 1 or 2 page kind of like recommendation. And I think the goal, the mayor had said at some point, like, I think consensus would be the best option for that. Mm-hmm. It is going to be, as you said, kind of a little bit more on the cumbersome side, as it will take us as a group to kind of go through it all. But that was one of the previous discussions we had. So I don't know if we want to try to see if anyone objects to that.
It means a slightly longer meeting next time, and I do hope to plan. Jeff and I are working out the schedule, but I do plan to be in person with you next time, which I'm looking forward to. So it means a slightly longer meeting, but I think as I said, it has its advantages in coming to a group consensus on each score before moving forward. It allows for a very robust discussion. So, Michael.
Yeah, I agree. It does allow for that robust discussion. And if folks can, just have a sense of where they think 1 through 12 lands. Mm-hmm. Interview. Obviously, we haven't interviewed anyone yet, so we're not going to score that one. But 1 through 12 committee members should have a general, some feedback in their mind, ready to say, okay, was this not acceptable, or highly acceptable? Mm-hmm. Those phrases aren't the exact
advantageous
use, but if you follow me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Mayor.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So I would just, to go to the consensus, actually to go back a step, thank you all for agreeing to do this. I know you all are public employees, public servants, and I really, really appreciate it. The specificity of picking each one of you is rather than personal, but what point of view you bring to this process. And I would hope, or my idea around the consensus and why I so favor it is, Megan comes from a certain standpoint and view, but Greg knows the nuts and bolts of why that may or may not happen. And I fear that it comes, if it came out anywhere but consensus, we would just go back and forth. You guys would all be, asked to come to a certain finance or whatever city council would want to do and go through everybody's. And while the consensus, I feel each one of us on this call and each one of you as the meeting, as the committee, have been very involved with the process of the schools and have specific feelings around each building. So really urging consensus, and also, we're working through or whatever else that I can provide. Like, I don't know, you're going to work through, a weekend or get you brunch or get you dinner or whatnot. I will incentivize with food. And I know Salem is kind of doing a couple of things at once, but I would love to hear Salem's point of view as far as council and this going forward, and what you think about consensus and the general scheduling of it.
So I think that having a score sheet that we each do and having that as a starting point for consensus is a great idea. And then actually using consensus as the method. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear you're all sort of moving towards that, because I think that's far more robust in terms of the recommendations. So, but I like to give people the options. So that's easy. We'll prepare the score sheets and send them out to you. I've got them mostly, and then you can be working through that and have that with you, but you're not submitting it to anybody. You're just bringing it to you as an aide memoir for the process. And then we'll come to consensus on each of those. In terms of the weighting, again, you could just add up all of the scores. But there was a question during the process, developing the RFP as to whether or not certain things should be weighted higher than others. So in the scenarios that I'm showing here, and I have 3 scenarios, right? I had submitted an Excel spreadsheet that was set up, and just for the purposes of discussion, where you see original scenario in here, those were the numbers. So that, for example, all the scores for 1, 2, 3 would be added together. That'd be 50% of the final score. The scores for 4 to 8 would be added together. That would be 25% of the final score. The scores for 9 through 13 added together, that would be 25% of the final score. And then I just showed an alternate that had the interview out separately from 9 to 12, and then just throw it open for discussion for us. I think it's important that we know before we leave the meeting whether or not we want to wait and the percentages, because I'd like that to be settled before you start reviewing the proposals and adding numbers to them, right? Once you get the numbers going, it's harder to go back and say, or, it's maybe easier to go back and say, oh, well, if we weight it this way, then, my preferred will get it. So we should have this decided before we leave today, whether or not we want to weight them, and if so, how. These boxes could certainly be moved around. So for example, you could, do 1 through 4, get a higher weighting, since certainly responsive design, and by that design that's responsive to the neighborhood, might be more of a community desire, or responsive design and environmental sustainability might be more of a community desire. So that's up for renewal. But I think having come to consensus on the issue of consensus, this is probably where we need to have most of our discussion. Jeff.
Thanks. So I'll throw this out, and it's just to get the conversation going. But I think that on one hand, this percentage one could be helpful. I like the simplicity of the 1 and 2 on the advantageous and highly advantageous, because I think for me, it eliminates some of the questions about how did we get to the percentage weight.
Right.
So I don't want to say that that's my absolute position, but if you go back, can you go back 1 slide?
Yeah, of course.
To me, I think this is a little bit easier to show our objectivity on it.
Mhm.
Looking really closely at what we had talked about, the words there, the advantageous and not, or highly advantageous. So I don't know. I don't know if other people have an opinion, but I just would throw mine out there for that.
Megan.
Just a clarifying question. So if we do the percentages, would it be ranking each of those numbers 1 through 12 as 0, 1, or 2, but then each of we end up combine? Okay, so it would be like you would have this sheet still. It would just have like an additional column with the groupings or something.
Exactly. It would be like, and I can show you the spreadsheet. I've got it up as well. It would be like handicapping a horse race, right? So you all start with 126 pounds or so, and then depending on how fast the horse is, you add a little bit more weight. In this case, it would be, do we want to give extra consideration to some of the things that have come up during the process, and less weighting to things like, well, if they don't have financial stability, they should probably be pretty low on the list anyway, for example. So, Mayor. I think you may be muted.
Kind of related or not, but the already from community groups and committees and also city councilors, how to submit comments, written comments about what their opinions are on the proposals you guys are looking at, and when in that timeline should that happen. Yeah, and where and I explained this group is subjectively weighing each proposal on a set of criteria that conform with 30B, but also with city council. So I'm not sure if it should be, or not, it can be at any time, and Jeff or my office kind of keep a folder of those, or they go to Omar as like for city council because they'll be deliberating. But I know some stuff is already coming in. And I expect to hear stuff at public speak at different meetings as well, but it's more the written comment that I anticipate being much longer, and where they come in the process.
Michael, I think you could probably, I've got a suggestion, but I think you might
I'm just
the procurement officer first.
weighting the evaluation criteria. You know, when we weight these, when we assign weighted values to, say, the certain group of these evaluation criteria, we're really saying that they are more important than the others. And I'm not sure I feel comfortable with that. Affordable housing is obviously a huge goal, the goal with the redevelopment of these surplus school buildings. But, you know, the number of sites in the proposal is as important as the responsive design, is as important new construction versus retention of existing buildings. So I'm just going to throw it out there. Weighting would not be my preference.
One possibility might be, and I think this goes to the comments that the mayor made as well, is this committee, and throw this out there, but my understanding is this committee is supposed to be the objective. What was in the proposal? Does it meet with our not advantageous, advantageous, and highly advantageous? We've interviewed them for the missing information or to get a sense of there, and here city council's score. Unless there's and this is why I mentioned, Michael, you might know this, unless there's some aspect of procurement that I'm not familiar with in terms of public comments, I would anticipate that those would go to city council. And then it's perhaps city council that might add the additional weighting in terms of, what they have heard from the public versus the recommendation. But Michael, I would want to, check with you and make sure that that was consistent with standard procurement practice. But my understanding is that this evaluation committee is not taking into consideration the public comments, although they're important, because this committee's responsibility is simply to look at the RFP versus the proposals received.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we welcome public comment. There was a public comment on our agenda for this afternoon's meeting. But in terms of committee members' evaluation of the proposals, we should be looking at what has been presented on the paper in front of us, not some public comment that was brought up.
Jeff, yeah.
I guess a question on the weighting. Does it help clarify the score at the end? Like if we just do that, and maybe I have this all mixed up because I'm really stuck on that 1 and 2, the 0, 1, and 2. But then you kind of said you merge it with the weighting. If we just do it with no weighting, is it a concern that we might get just by like 1 point? And would the weighting like help make those differences look clearer? Is that one of the benefits of it? I guess that's one question. I had another one, but I'll stop at that one.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're absolutely, I mean, in both situations, you could end up with having the exact same score, right? The difference of having it just by points as opposed to adding the percentage weighting is that if you ended up, say, let's see, there's 13 of these, say you ended up with both of them at 26, right? They were both highly advantageous on absolutely everything, which I'm not expecting. Or all three were there at a 26. I'm not expecting that. The weighting might shift the balance of in favor of one versus the other because they might have scored a little bit higher in one than another. Actually, the 26 wouldn't work. Say they're both mathematically it won't work. Say they're both at 23. That would work. The weighting would shift one way or the other potentially. They may also have scored 2s and all of the same things, in which case the weighting's not going to help you very much. So I think if it comes down to a tie between two, we would then have to look a little bit more closely at what each proposed and see if there's some difference based on what this committee knows that would, in terms of the recommendation to city council, say, hey, they both scored a 23 or all three of them scored a 23, but we think based on X, Y, Z, this makes more sense. And then the city council has that full amount of information with which to make their own recommendations. So, but you could end up in a tie. Sorry, Megan, go ahead.
No, so I immediately start looking at this like I look at grading in a class, like what goes forward to grade. Yeah. And so I just looked, it's like each of those categories is like 7.5% of the total grade for the class for RFP. Sure. So another way of thinking about it is rather than into 3 groups, with or without the interview, we could just think about, are those top 3 the 3 that maybe are the most relevant or most directly from what was asked for or what is sort of from the strategic plan? Maybe those ones go to 10% and then the rest of them are just evenly divided, right? So it's doing that approach, but not so dramatically. I don't know. That's the teacher in me.
Sure.
Well, and back to the teacher in you, which I think is an excellent analogy for this. There is also the interview process. And so, something that scores objectively, and this is why the interview questions are going to be so important, making sure that we ask those consistently is something that, may look equal on paper. When you get to the interview, quite frequently, that's where a differentiation comes in. So because you get a sense of whether or not the interviewee is more responsive to the questions, more familiar with the community, whatever that information that comes out of that can often be a differentiating factor. I
mean, I think we're away from the comment, but I just or the situation. But as far as looking at any sources, information, like as far as public comment or not, I just we have been very direct that this is the objective group, and while I think that there'll be a lot of great public comment and whatnot, I just worry about it all infiltrating this process, even with the best intent. I think we don't get over the perception barrier. So I wanted to kind of say that out loud, probably more for myself. And I think it's going to be really hard for those of you on the committee, as people will come up to you and say, hey, Greg, I know you're on the committee, like, how's it going? Or don't forget this or that. But I love the redirecting people and saying, look, talk to city council. I'm not even on the committee, and, they're doing their job. So, yeah, that was just a concern, a point to thing.
Michael?
Yeah, I would just know, we're an evaluation committee, and we're going to make a recommendation to the full city council. Ultimately, is up to the city council to make that to make the decision. They may ask these 3 proposers to come in and interview. If there's 2 that has risen to the top out of 3, they might ask 2 of the 3 to come in for an interview. It's important to know that both the City Council and the Community Preservation Act Committee are both going to have opportunities to interview the top rated proposer on numerous occasions, most likely. Our job is to look at the basics of the proposal they've submitted and determine some of these basic questions. Does it meet minimum criteria set in the RFP? How does it score on the 1 through 12 criteria? I would just note that on NHP Foundation's proposal, they have already given us what they believe is their rated criteria. Reviewers, please try to ignore that when you read through this. They may be on target, but it is our determination to make those classifications, not theirs. So I'll just leave that out there.
Jeff, you had your hand up.
Yeah, sorry. I had 2 comments, and then something that Michael said, I just wanted to, I guess, clarify. So Michael, you mentioned CPA and city council with respect to interviews. And I think what you meant is that they'll have plenty of opportunity to talk to the preferred developer once they're chosen.
Yes,
right?
That's what I meant.
Right. And then, so that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that word, because I think they will have interactions with them, certainly once there's a chosen one. But in the interviews, Emily, maybe you can help with this. I was kind of thumbing through the RFP. So in one place, I think it's page 45, because I've been kind of stuck on 45. I've been kind of pulling from page 45. It talks about it's actually not page 45. Sorry, let me get the right page. It talks about the role of the evaluation committee. Let me see if I can find the right page.
I am also looking.
I think it's page 28. So
yes.
Selection and disposition process. So I just wanted to ask, in the RFP on that page, it says that this group would do the interview. And on one conversation we had in the past was that was going to be the only real interview opportunity, like the real chance for us to interview all 3 if we wanted to. And on page, on a later page, actually on an earlier page, on page 27, under proposal terms and conditions, item E, it kind of says the city reserves the right to interview any and all respondents. The city reserves the right to modify,
yes.
or reject. I mean, that's a general clause, but I just was wondering about this idea of us interviewing them, and then can city council call all 3 back in and interview them if we've already kind of identified the preferred group? So that leads me to my one last question, was something that the mayor said. If we are the only group who does the interview, we had talked about kind of like asking city councilors in particular. I mean, it could be the general public, but city councilors to submit questions that they would want to have asked. So that was just a whole bunch of stuff to just throw out there.
I remember that conversation.
Yeah.
I do. I remember that as well, Jeff. Yeah, disregard what I said. Totally not congruent with what is in writing.
I mean, I tend to agree that we don't need the public comment for this portion, but whether the city councilors want to have an option to submit comments to our questions for us to ask. So,
or review the questions that this group comes up with at our next meeting. It would also be an opportunity for that. And then if there's something that's missing, that they're very concerned about, perhaps add that in. So, but my understanding was that this, and I think the way that I was thinking of it when we were collectively drafting the RFP, is that this committee would be doing the interviews because it's 13 is one of the evaluation criteria, is that interviews. So, but I recall the discussion of having city council, this counselors be able to submit questions, or as I said, perhaps review questions and then say, oh, but we'd like you to ask X as well. I think that's totally reasonable. So
maybe attend a meeting so they can hear the answers to the questions they're seeking.
we could also, yes, absolutely, or record the interviews so that they can watch them afterwards as well. I think there's plenty of options to make sure that city council has the full amount of information they need. I hear the concerns about.
Mayor's muted. I think she wants to talk.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mayor.
Salem, as we were just talking about the city council stuff, you want to weigh in as a city councilor? I know you're only one.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think if we give everybody a copy of the questions that we come up with at the next meeting and ask for feedback, maybe, and then, everything else that was said was great, like recording it and inviting them to, if we didn't address the question, to send them to us. So I think those are all good.
Great.
And just to jump on, so Emily, when we're talking about questions that this group is asking, the different groups, do they need to be do the questions need to be decided before, and do the applicants get a question? Like when we interview people here, there's 8 different questions that pertain to the position. So I'm just wondering how the questions work, and do we have to, or should we tell the applicants that these are group questions from here, and there might be additional from city council, and just kind of trying to pick apart the process, getting ready for the questions?
I think it's an excellent thing to do. Yes, I would recommend that we come up with a set of questions that we will ask every single participant, knowing that obviously when you do follow-up questions, those might differ, right? But we should have our basic 8 or 7 or 10, whatever it is that, this group will collectively ask. I think that, having been on the other side of this and responding to RFPs and interviews, it is very handy having the questions in advance so you can prepare for them. I think it also makes the interview a little bit more efficient. And we should certainly discuss the structure of the interview at our next meeting when we think about the questions, because we'll want to say, you have so much time for the interview. We could actually probably talk about this now, because Jeff, we're going to have to schedule those interviews quickly to make the timeline. So, usually it can range from either a half hour to an hour per group. So we want to talk about that. How long do they have for presentation versus our questions? I did one recently where it was a half hour. We were given a half hour slot. So 10, 15 minutes for a presentation and 15 minutes for a Q&A. But if you run over, that becomes, a long meeting. So maybe it's 45 minutes. And then that gives you some room for maneuver for the next group. So we should probably decide on that, because we'll need to slot in the timing. Just to jump back to the weightings, I'm hearing from you all kind of a little bit of concern that adding the weightings into the point list is adding that subjectivity, and that maybe that is more appropriate for the city council as opposed to this group. And so maybe we just keep it to the 0, 1, 2 at this point, and then allow city council, because of their process, to bake in the public discussion, the additional weightings. Did I accurately capture what I'm hearing? Jeff?
I think you did. I think you accurately assessed this group. My question in response to what you just said, though, is does the city council have to weight it? Because they
don't have to. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Because I agree. I think it's a little difficult for our group to do it, although what Megan said would be the way I would do it. I would suggest we do it is go to 10. And your list, just because Megan kind of asked, I think your list is actually almost in order of I've been involved in the group the whole time, but so like affordable housing, retain the gym and cafeteria, community connections, and then the only other thing I would move up would be number of sites in the proposal. So like those would be the top 4 that if we were going to wait, it would go to 10. Everything else was important, but not like waitable. But I do like the idea of us staying objective, and that would be the best way to do it, is just to not have us wait them. But then my other question was whether city council actually needs to wait it, or whether at that point they'd have the preferred proposal. I guess they would need to wait if they wanted to go back and our group.
Yeah, I misspoke. They certainly don't have to wait it. What I meant is that the type of input they're getting at that point may more naturally weight their discussions. I didn't mean that they had to go back and redo all 3 proposals with weightings this time. So it's just that at that point they are collecting the public input. They will have their own, opinions, and they will have read the report of this committee. They may have watched the interviews or heard the responses to the questions that they submitted. So that will naturally give more of an impact on what they're hearing at that point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. And then you would ask about the kind of the interviews. We did the doodle poll, and it was not everyone responded to the next kind of date slots, but March 16th looked like the potentially best available. I know that Megan said yes, and the mayor said yes. And then right before the call, I chatted with Salem, and he thought that would potentially work.
Right.
So if we set that date at least, that would be helpful. And then we would probably aim for the interviews to be the week after that. And
I think you and I were looking at maybe the 21st, which is the Tuesday.
Right. And that would be if we tried to group all 3 together, that would be a pretty big chunk of time
It'd be a chunk of time. It would give you the chance to sort of see everybody, one after the other, which is a long meeting, but it also means that you're not seeing them 2 days later, you're seeing the next one. 2 days after that, you're seeing the next one. Now, they may have conflicts, right? So that becomes the other problem. And we'll want to look at that as well. Sorry? March 21st.
March?
Yeah.
So that is the first night of superintendent interviews.
So popular day for interviews then.
It's a popular day for interviews. And in theory, not in theory, they are public, and perhaps people will be attending those, hopefully, to participate in that process. So,
well, one question too is, I had been looking at night meetings, but obviously, most of you are city staff or otherwise, very tightly involved. Day meetings might work out well for the development team as well as for all of you. So just throwing that out there, that might give some more flexibility to the schedule.
Yeah, and I know in the past, Salem, I would direct this to you because I know that, and Megan too, actually, because you guys are the 2 with the actual outside jobs.
Yes.
Would a daytime meeting ever be something you could accommodate?
So I guess I'll start on that one. So first of all, the 16th is good for me. So thumbs up to that. And as far as daytime meetings go, I have a prep period where I could potentially have a chunk of time that I could allot. And that would be from 11 o'clock to 12:30.
Okay.
So I have an hour and a half that I could, and I know that's a little tight, but that otherwise I'm pretty much swamped during the day until 3:30.
Okay.
And Megan, you're probably the same. I would maybe.
Are a nightmare until May, and then it's really.
And then it opens up for some reason.
Mondays in general, I can fit longer blocks in, so it is possible on Monday for me.
Mondays, okay.
Okay, so
All right.
maybe we can do a little offline scheduling, but I did hear confirmation on the 16th. Megan, if that worked for you, you had marked yes on the doodle poll. If it works for Michael and Greg too, that might be a good target for us to land on, and then we can coordinate the rest. I appreciate what Megan said about March 21st. And actually, there's a big planning board meeting that
Okay.
there's a lot of public interest for. So we probably need to avoid that one day at least.
Okay.
But I'm happy to kind of send out that and try to coordinate that
Okay.
part of it.
Megan.
Greg, you look like you're going to.
I just was going to say that 13th to the 17th, I know it's fast planning and we have one other meeting that week, but if things could move even faster, that's spring break and every day is free. Meeting-wise.
All right. Jeff, so Jeff and I will coordinate some more dates offline and get you all some choices. I apologize. I've got a hard stop right before 5:00. Talk about shoehorning meetings in. So, but it sounds to me, we've got the 16th set. I'm going to just clean up a couple of errors I saw in the, or just make sure that the PowerPoint I opened and showed you is actually the last one. And if not, Jeff, I'll send you the new one and I'll send you your scorecard sheet so you can at least start working there. So, back to the things to do for the next meeting, the reading the proposal, bringing your notes from your criteria review, comments on anything that you think is missing, and then, some initial interview questions for our discussion. And we'll come up with our first set of weightings. We'll come up with the interview questions. We can send them to city councilors for their review and any additional ones. And then we can confirm the dates of the interview and times of the interviews. Michael, mute.
Michael, you're muted. Sorry. Yep.
4 members of the evaluation committee. If anyone has questions, concerns, further inquiries about your review, please feel free to call me next week, call me tomorrow, send me an email. I will get right back to you and we'll discuss what you need to discuss and go from there.
Perfect.
Greg, does the 16th work for you? You look like maybe you're going to chime in.
Yeah, I can do the 16th.
Okay, great. All right. Great. This was really successful. I'm really glad everyone could get together at this time, and we'll convene again on March 16th. And then, like Michael said, there's a lot of in between. So contact Michael if you need help, and we go from there. Is there anything else that we're missing, Emily?
I don't think so. I think we're good. So you'll see some documents from Jeff that I will give him within the next couple of days. You should see those from him soon, and we'll go from there.
And then just for everyone in full disclosure, I am going to put this meeting on the webpage. We have a project webpage. I'm going to post this meeting. I'll draft up some minutes and maybe we can bring them at the next, I might post them as draft and then we'll review them and we can approve them at the next meeting. But I do want to put this up there so that it's available for people who want to watch. And the slideshow, we'll get that too, Emily?
Yep. Yeah, as soon as I clean it up.
Okay.
Excellent. Looking forward to seeing you all on the 16th.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a great evening.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.